Well, good evening. This is really exciting, and it's always wonderful to hear how we have different things happening on our map show in the evenings, and you can have different backgrounds taking place. So I'm excited to have you join us tonight, and we have a very, very special speaker. And for those of you who have joined into our Wednesday night map show, you definitely have met and know Peter Darrell. And Peter Darrell and I and a couple of friends meet every single Wednesday morning. So on a Wednesday, it's kind of us spending the day together. We start with breakfast and we end with supper. Of course, we're not together the whole day, but we literally see each other. And Peter has become a true friend over the last 23 years. And it's been wonderful just to have someone as committed and setting an example beyond anyone else in terms of his commitment to Map for Life and to touching lives and transforming people. Peter got his first copy of Map for Life before it was even called Map for Life. And so in December 1999, he used the tool and the methodology for the first time, and that has had an impact in his life, and I'm sure he will tell us more about it later in the show. So I trust that you're going to enjoy the evening. I would love to invite you to share your comments. If you have any questions that you would like to ask of the panel, from Heather and Marvin, who will be joining me later this evening, please pop them on the comments field, and we would love to engage you in that way. So let's enjoy tonight with Peter Darrell.
Good evening, everybody. So wonderful to be with you. Yes, and as Glenn said, I got involved with Map for Life before it even started. My book was called Your History in the Making, and it changed my life. And I've been working on it constantly for something like 23 years. And that's what I want to talk about tonight, how it changed my life and how it can change other people's lives. But it's something that we need to work at. Last week, Glenn spoke on the two worlds, the original world and the counterfeit world. And tonight I want to continue with that same theme, talking about two worlds. But I wasn't on the show last week. I was down with a little bit of the flu that's been going around. So I only saw the show later. The first thing that struck me was that Glenn was talking about people writing a book. And it's just a lovely thought. Glenn and I spoke about it today. And we've spoken about it a lot over the years. And I'd like to encourage you to think about writing your book. Last Thursday, I also went to a book launch. There was a book launch given by an old business colleague of mine, a chap by the name of Peter Layburn. And he wrote a book called Leading with Humanity. It was so wonderful. The first question thrown at him was, well, Pete, why did you write that book? And he said, well, it's something that I've been working on for a long time. It's something that I believed in, but I just never quite got round to it. And then we had the lockdown, and that gave me the opportunity just to do it. And it's a book about leadership, but leadership for a time like now. Chapter 1 in the book is entitled Change is the Only Constant. And he starts with a quote, and I'm going to read the quote. Every few hundred years throughout Western history, a sharp transformation has occurred. In a matter of decades, society altogether rearranges itself, its worldview, its basics, values, its social and political structures, its arts, its key institutions. 50 years later, a new world exists. The people born into that world cannot even imagine the world in which their grandparents lived and into which their own parents were born. That was by Peter Drucker way back in 1992. And it's certainly something that I can relate to. You know, as I think about it, that in my preparation, I hadn't taken it any further, but I think about my grandparents, and my grandparents came out to South Africa from the UK at the time of the Anglo-Boer War, and participated there. So you talk about what life was like then, and you compare it since then. Now, Peter Leyburn is much of my age, and he talks about the advice he got from his father when he left school. And it was a case of, go get a job with a big company, keep your nose clean, and the system will take care of you. Certainly that doesn't apply today, but I'm sure some of you would have heard similar statements coming from your parents, maybe, that the world has moved on from that. And I'm going to talk about some of those changes. I think back to the changes that I sort of seen, and I talk about the Cold War. I talk of East versus West. I think of the Korean War. I spent my military training in the Air Force, so I was very much aware of South Africa's role in the Korean War, and that how we had the flying cheetahs stationed at waterproof airbase. I think I grew up with the Vietnam War, and it's something I was quite fascinated about. And when I went across to America to talk to my contemporaries, and I've been in America, I may well have been one of those. I got caught up in the civil rights movement, and I think both there and here. I can also remember when the Berlin Wall came down, and once upon a time I had actually a little glass jar where I had cuttings or segments taken from the Berlin Wall, and I looked for them this evening, but they've long gone, disappeared. But I also saw the rise of capitalism and how it dominated the world. I was a little bit of a Jack Welch, General Electric groupie. I read his books. I studied what he'd done. I love my business college books, and he wrote some great stuff. What I thought was great stuff. I loved his second or third wife, Susie, who was something like 20 years later, and they wrote about success. And he's been described as single-handedly ushering in a new cutthroat era of American capitalism. And I studied those books. Lo and behold, just this week, I picked up a new book, and the book's entitled "The Man Who Broke Capitalism." Jack Welch gutted the heartland and crushed the soul of America, and it's unbelievable what has happened. And the world has certainly shifted, and almost everything has been turned upon its head. Now, the term, and hence the subject of my presentation tonight, used to describe this current situation, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, is VUCA. And as we were getting ready for tonight, Glenn reminded one of the panelists that where he comes from in East London, where they speak Ikoza, VUCA in Ikoza means wake up. I think that's part of it. It is this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. We need to wake up to it. I think this global pandemic and the lockdown has exacerbated it all. It must today, more than ever before, we need a map to take us through these times. I talk of these times as being light and darkness. And I believe that we've been called, been created to be that light in the darkness. We certainly were created for a purpose that the world cannot do without. But we stand in a world dominated by self-advancement, self-esteem, and self-sufficiency. The world is shaped by minimal certainty and a tendency towards instant gratification. Success has become material, measured by what we own, our job titles, and our authority. Erich Fromm, the famous German psychoanalyst, spoke of the two modes of existence struggling for the spirit of humankind. There is the having mode, which concentrates on material possession, power, and then there is the being mode, which is based on love, gratitude, and giving. And I pose the question, where are you? But I think more importantly, who are you? I think the second question is the foundation of personal purpose, which shapes us and fuels who we are being. The Map for Life methodology starts off with establish your position. I think whilst we do that, sadly, very few of us have had the luxury of taking time out and establishing exactly who they really are. Part of leading with humanity is very similar to one of my other leaders, Richard Lader, who wrote a book, Claiming Your Place at the Fireside. And both of them talk about spending time with nature. As Boyd Varty says, he wrote a book called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. Nature doesn't see status or wealth or social position. It cares only about presence, one's ability to read signs, navigate the terrain, and translate the language of the wilderness. Nature is the great equalizer. This morning, Jen and I had breakfast with a very good friend, Jaap Nel, and Jaap talks about having done what he calls his 10 camp, where he goes out and connects with nature and goes through and clearly defines who he is, what he loves doing, what he's good at, what he's passionate about, what's his mission, what's his vocation. And I think we need to embark on a similar journey. We need to take time out to establish exactly who we really are. I talk about embarking on a journey of self-discovery. And I'd like to hear what the panel's got to say about their journeys of self-discovery. I'd also like to say we need to prioritize about creating a life of significance as opposed to a life of success. And once we have done that, we can become true to our wild, authentic self and lead an authentic life. Authenticity has always been the fundamental block for personal growth and development. I must stress that the Map for Life 7-day or 20-day program is just the start of the journey. I started that journey, as Glenn said, way back in 1999. It's a journey that I visit and work on a daily, a regular basis. It's a case of I lead a life of continual renewal and continual discovery. I want to move on to another world that we live in, and it's a world where we have the haves and the have-nots. I don't think our society has ever been more unequal than it is now. And I don't care whether we're talking about South Africa, the UK, America, or anywhere else in the world. There's a big gap between the haves and the have-nots. I'm just reading Jack Welch and General Electric and see how they enlarged the gap between the haves and the have-nots. When Jack Welch took over General Electric, it was worth $14 billion US. 2 decades later, it was 600 billion. But here's a startling fact. When he took over, the average CEO of a company like that was made less than 50 times, still a big gap, but 50 times what the annual workman salary was. But when he left, that 50 had grown to 368. And we just saw this gap grow. And that's what has created so many of the problems. One of my other mentors is Max Lucado, and he wrote a book entitled Outlive Your Life, or subtitled You Were Made to Make a Difference. And he talks about the haves and the have-nots. He says, and he's talking to the American audience, he says that there are 145 million orphans worldwide. Nearly 236 million people in the US call themselves Christians. From a purely statistical standpoint, American Christians by themselves have the wherewithal to house every orphan in the world. The storehouse is stacked. The problem is not supply. The problem is distribution. Our generation, this current generation, has been given everything it needs to correct the situation. And Max asks 3 questions that rocked my world. And he starts off by saying, had you been a German during World War II, would you have taken a stand against Hitler? And then he goes on to say, had you lived in South Africa during the apartheid years, what would you have done? And then he asks, when your grandchildren discover you lived during a day in which 1.75 billion people were poor and 1 billion were hungry, how will they judge your response? We've been given a choice. We could rock the world with hope, or we could do nothing. My challenge to you is, what are you going to do about it? Thank you for listening.
I don't know about you, but I love these Wednesday evenings, you know, the opportunity just to be able to think beyond the comfort zone, to think outside of the room to be beyond the walls of the box, and what Peter has shared with us this evening is just an opportunity to begin to look at the things that are really important in life, and to maybe question our own contribution and what are we doing other than criticizing the rest that are doing nothing. This evening, I've got Heather and Marvin joining me, so I'm going to bring them into the studio right now, and we're going to have a great time of just having a chat about what Peter has shared with us. But before that, I'm going to ask Heather and Marvin just to briefly tell us their map story. How did you get to meet Map for Life? Heather, why don't you share your story with us?
Hi, Glenn, and good evening, everybody. Well, I wasn't even sure it was Map for Life. My brother, who lived in Cape Town, attended some event, and he photocopied some of the pages from his binder and sent them to Mum and I and said, "You've got to have a look at this." And now I know it was the Wheel of Life. Um, and those days you had newsprint kind of papers. So I duplicated them and used it for quite a while. And when I came down to Cape Town on holiday, I went into an old book they called Bikini Bookshop. Well, it's more like a ordered house with books because you have to search for stuff. And I found a copy of this Map for Life, and I was so excited by it. But I came back with it to UK and put it next to the bed, did nothing about it. And then when I looked at it, I noticed that it was still brand new and there was a free gift in there. And I thought, well, if this person didn't use the book, they didn't use the free gift either. So I subscribed to the free gift many, many years later because it's a 2004 book. And Glenn got in touch with me, and the rest is history. I did the first course, the 20 days. I got coached on how to be a coach, and I'm just so excited. And after my Bible, this is the second book I use every single day.
You know something, Heather, as you were sharing, I was just thinking for a moment during the lockdown period, how I was desperate to get a photograph of the sunset in Cape Town, and I just couldn't find the right spot. You can see this beautiful sunset, but I just couldn't maneuver my car into the right place. And I took out my GPS and I just put my finger on a spot, and I saw this very interesting name, Bikini Beach. And nonetheless, I headed off in that direction, and there was a fire en route. I was diverted, and I finally got to the beach, and I took this photograph over the ocean. And immediately after I'd taken that photograph, I turned around to take a photo of the buildings behind me so that I had a reference point, only to find out the next day that I'd taken a photograph of Bikini Bookstore. So I just love hearing your story, and it's just such an amazing thing how these kind of things take place. And so I'm going to ask Marvin to share his story with us, because he's also traveled a journey with Map for Life. So Marvin, tell us,
Thank you.
How did Map for Life come along your path?
Thank you. I can remember two clear incidents of how Map for Life came across my path. During my last few years at high school, when we stayed in PE, my dad had this book called Map for Life, and I think it was dated 2007, 2008, or something like that. And I kept it with me, never really knowing what Map for Life is all about, until I moved to Pretoria a good couple of years later on. We were invited to a talk at the Botanical Gardens in Pretoria. And lo and behold, the author of Map for Life is talking. Really enjoyed the inspirational talk that Glenn had given. When I went home and I picked up this book again, it only really dawned on me that, wow, this is Mr. Map for Life in himself in front of me. So that really encouraged me to actually dig deep and see what is Map for Life all about. And the timing of it was actually perfect for me, because I was at a point in my life where I'm like really trying to understand what is it that I'm here, meant to do here on Earth. Really asking the questions about purpose. And Map for Life has actually helped me to become a lot more clear in terms of my role on this earth and my role to humankind. So, and it's been an exciting journey ever since. And I look forward to continuing.
Marvin, as you sharing that story, I was just suddenly making the connection with what Peter was sharing with us a short while ago, and that was the environment in which the talk was given. I remember so clearly you and your wife Joanne coming to that particular talk all those years ago. But just sitting there, right? I'm sure you remember sitting on the wooden deck outside with the pond with the ducks and the fish next to us, and all of the trees in the distance, and just that kind of space or that environment, I think, is so important in today's world. And I'm sure, as Peter was talking, I was just thinking of some of the people who have started using Map for Life, and how they struggle sometimes to find the ideal environment in which to start their map. I don't know if any of you have got some thoughts about that. If somebody's maybe just got their first copy of Map for Life, and they haven't started yet because they're struggling to find the ideal environment. What advice would you give them? Heather, you look like you've got some advice to share.
No, I'm just laughing at that because this year some people bought a copy of the Map for Life blueprint from me and had no idea what it was, simply because I said, listen, it's a great book, it's a great diary, it's a great tool, you need to use it. And then one of the people who bought it phoned me and said, I don't have time for this. It's too big and I don't even know where to start. But as you say, it wasn't about the size of the book or about it being too good. It just wasn't the right environment. And, when you take some time, and she went away for the weekend, and she was surrounded by nature in Cornwall on the beach during winter with nothing to do, she picked it up and she had the time because she was in the right environment. So that nature that Peter was talking about and putting yourself in the right time, the right environment, works very well with when it's the right time for you. So, yeah.
When you're talking like that, I can kind of hear Peter's voice echoing in the back of my mind and saying, when is the right time? And the right time is now. Kind of now is the right time, because we always have an excuse of some kind, don't we, Marvin? They sort of we tend to have that ability to postpone things or to procrastinate or to think maybe we're too busy. If there are people, I'm sure, when I say I'm sure, I know that I have suffered and continue to have issues with procrastination, for example. And so I'm sure that you are familiar with this as well. What sort of advice can you give to people to overcome that tendency to make an excuse instead of find a reason to do something?
I was just thinking, Glenn, 2.5 years ago when we entered this thing called lockdown, how that was the most opportune time in our lives for us that are alive in this world right now. Because at that time, it was a moment of introspection. It was a moment where a lot of us are asking the question about who we are, what we're all about. And very much in line with what Peter was talking about in terms of leading with humanity. The humanitarian side of people really came out. At that time, we were forced to stop. We were forced to take a pause. And when we did that, it was amazing how nature responded. I remember seeing photos of different places around the world. One that really stands out for me is there were some photos in the desert, I think in the Kalahari, where flowers just started growing. There was other, it was like life just reproduced itself. And it just made me realize that, it's so important to take the time, make time for yourself, because you are important and everything about you is important. Because if you don't, then you're obviously chasing somebody else's dream and making somebody else's thing more important. And when you make time for yourself, you're creating that space or that environment for yourself to really start digging in. And by digging in, it's just a matter of asking some simple questions like Peter had asked. So, who are you? What is your role? What is your purpose? In terms of your second question, I was just thinking about procrastination is all about us weighing certain things more important than other things. If you think about, if you put importance on yourself as the most important, not in a vain way, but in a way that you can be a better person by doing so, you will put all other excuses aside, including load shedding, and take the time to really dig deep and see who you are. The minute you put higher priorities on other things, that's when we allow excuses to come forward. And once you make one excuse on day one, making another excuse on day two becomes easier, and day three becomes easier. So it's always important to also have an accountability partner, and that's what Map for Life always brings. If you look at the acronym MAP, my accountability partner is one of the one way you could look at that acronym, and a great opportunity to link up with MAP is through a MAP cafe, where you can present yourself and all your ideas, your plans, your purpose to a team of like-minded people that will help you along your journey to reach your goal. And I think your number one goal should be identifying who you are. I was just thinking, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but I was just thinking about a specific quote that I read. It says, "Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be?"
That's a very powerful, very
it's important
powerful.
to go.
Just can you repeat that again?
Go back. Yes, I'll repeat that. It says, "Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be?" And I think too many of us are so consumed by trying to live up to a picture or a framework or a reference that the world has depicted for us. And that world could be your wife, could be your family, your parents, it could be your friends, could be people at work. It's time for you to actually stop and go back to remembering who you are, the real you.
That's why it's so interesting when you look at Ngwadi's comment that he's put up. Peter is challenging us to walk the talk. And that ties in with everything you said, Marvin. Peter is challenging us, because we could sit on Map for Life and go on about what a wonderful tool it is. But like you say, load shedding tonight, I cannot be on. And I mean, no disrespect to anybody who said that, but, it's about walking the talk.
Heather, I was just we raised this thing about lockdown, and or when I say we, Peter talked about lockdown and talked about the opportunity that somebody had to actually put a book together, to write a book, and I'm just so disappointed in myself that I had 2 years and a bit where I could have written a book. But there were many things that I was actually able to do differently during that time, despite the distractions. And I realized at a very early age, a very early stage rather, that the rules that we were complying with were man-made, not COVID-made. A lot of people blame COVID. They say COVID did this, COVID. No. Our own man-made rules caused the issues that we experienced, and but let's talk about lockdown, because maybe you did something, Heather, during lockdown that you hadn't done before, that's been of value to you, and which you maybe continue doing right now.
Well, I think lockdown for me, at first I was a little bit envious of all those people who didn't have to go to work, who couldn't work, but the government was paying them, and I was working extra hours because in the finance industry, there was no excuse for not going to work because all you needed was a computer. But I did realize during lockdown that the people started valuing the quality of time. Even when I did go out, I noticed that people were more polite to each other. People were showing more respect to each other. And during that lockdown period, I got an opportunity to bond more, spend more time with my family,
Yeah.
be more creative in the kitchen, grow physically as well as mentally as a result of that. But most of all, I was able to actually do the Map for Life courses with you. I would have been on the train coming home. I would never have been given that opportunity. And I was able to share the Map for Life methodology with so many people. And I was able to discover what I really wanted to do. So I think the lockdown was good for a lot of people because a lot of children got to see their parents, especially over here where people commute a lot. They didn't see their parents.
Yeah.
So I thought that lockdown was good. There were just so many positives that one could draw from it.
I think when we look back in time, when Peter was talking about, what's the next generation's going to say about us who lived at this time. My grandfather used to talk about the 1918 flu. So he had a story which I couldn't relate to at all. But now we have this time, and I realized that at a fairly early stage that this lockdown could become my launch pad. And I think when we look back at this time, many people are going to actually refer to it as a pivotal moment in their life, something that may have been seen as a curse. They're going to talk about it as a blessing. Marvin, was there something that maybe you did differently or got started, or perhaps you know of somebody who did something differently?
Yes, during lockdown, there was a great opportunity for us as a family, and when I say family, of the wider family, to really rekindle again. During the lockdown period, we, as the cousins and second cousins, actually put together a family tree and just mapping out exactly, from the great-grandparents down to the grandparents, down to our parents, and then the levels below us with our kids. And just look at how big the family has spread and see where's everybody located. And it was just such an amazing experience because we managed to also get the parents and the parents' parents to come onto one Zoom meeting every so often and just touch base. We often use the excuse of we can't fly and we can't get a visa, but the lockdown actually enabled us to get a lot closer, a lot quicker. And to me, that obviously through the power of technology, but that just opened up new avenues and forced us to get closer as a family.
I think Marvin, Marvin, what you're talking about, what we're talking about here is this lockdown. And I just had a sense as you were talking that as Map for Life, I think we need to change the vocabulary from this point forward. Instead of talking about lockdown, we need to actually engage people and say, what were you doing during the launch period? When you were, did you launch your dream, or what dream did you launch in the last 2 years? Because I think that many people have thought about things that they otherwise would never have thought about. When I was growing up, one of the advice that I got from my grandparents and my parents sounded like this: get yourself a good education, find a good job, and life will be happy ever after. And I bought that idea hook, line, and sinker. I don't know, Heather, in your environment where you grew up in Zimbabwe, how or what were people saying there in that sort of vein?
Well, I think like in Africa, there are certain professions that people consider to be good professions. And I think as a whole, people are encouraged to go into those professions. I was blessed. My parents were highly educated, and my father was preached as well. And he often told me that I would be successful at anything I did because I gave it all. I gave it 100%. But I do know that with some of my brothers, he said, you need to get yourself a good job. You need to work hard. You need to, you need to get ahead. I think sometimes it also just depends on the character of a person. It's like some people, you can put them anywhere and they'll make a go of it.
Yeah, I just, there's a word that I often hear people say when it comes to dreaming. Besides the rhetoric that I had was kind of that you need to be the breadwinner. And I thought, well, I want to get more than just bread, go beyond that. But I just think that, maybe we need to start changing the narrative. Maybe we need to start encouraging others to dream again. And that word that so often, or phrase that people so often use today when they're talking about dreams, is we need to be realistic. You need to come back down to earth. Stop being over there in the clouds. And sometimes we might find ourselves being guilty of that. Marvin, I don't know what your father or your grandparents used to share with you. Maybe you can share your story, because I know that you went and you also followed the education route and you pursued that. So maybe the same message has been coming through.
I did. Seems like our parents went to the same school, Glenn. So my mom actually said, make sure you get a good education. I, at the time, wanted to pursue music on a full-time basis. I wanted to go and study that. And I have one uncle that was a full-time professional musician back in Zimbabwe. He was rated as the best drummer in his time. I had another uncle that was also a pro guitarist. But my mom looked at their lifestyles and looked at me and just said, no, that's not the lifestyle I have in mind for you. You go and study, and that's what I did. So I did a year of Bible college, and then that helped me to kind of get my head right. And then I started with my undergrad and continued from there. So I think, it's important to get the education.
You play music. Don't forget on your passion you do for a short while on Sundays. Is that right?
That's correct. So I still have pursued music, and I still continue to do. And it's amazing the influence that has. But that hasn't, at least, I still did what my parents said, and I still managed to get back to my passion of music, and I still continue to do that. So it's important to listen to the parents. There's lots of wisdom there. But it's also important to live your life. Don't let your parents live their life through you. Make sure.
I like that. Maybe we should be listening to our heart a bit more, and that idea of so many parents, in fact, are trying to live their life through their children. And I think I was just having a chat with my aunt and uncle who've been visiting from Durban in South Africa. I say Durban, not quite in Durban, but people around the world might know where Durban is. And they were just talking about the culture of the local community where they find themselves embedded, and how important it is for their children to either become a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant.
And
is that right? Yeah, and so and I found in from a Map for Life perspective, coaching people like that, and they are at a place of despair. the only reason they're doing their profession is because their mother or father forced them in that route. And I just think that from a Map for Life perspective, maybe we can begin to change that a little bit. And Peter asked a very interesting question. He referred to some significant negative events historically. I say negative because the focus has been on the negative aspects of the Second World War, or maybe apartheid in South Africa. But like any time in life, two things usually happen. Good and bad things happen during those times. But the significant question that Peter was asking is the one that's going to be on the minds of our children or grandchildren. And that question was, what were you doing when? And I think of today's world where we find ourselves right now, where there is turmoil happening. There is things that are happening that are not right. And the question is, what are we doing, or what should we be doing in a time? Anyone want to maybe touch on that briefly?
Well, I think like if somebody ever asked me what was I doing way back then, because Rhodesia went through a similar thing, um, you know, I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but we were comfortable. So there was nothing to be doing. And when you talk about now, and you've got the Ukrainian situation, and UK are talking a lot about the situation in the Ukraine, and lots of people are opening their homes and then donating. And you ask me, what am I doing now? I'm spending a lot of time thinking, well, when it was Syria, how many people were opening their homes? And you know, and basically, I'm not walking the talk. I'm busy questioning, as you spoke about earlier. But what's all the fuss about? We weren't fussing then. Now it's a big hurrah. You know what is going on? So it's
Isn't that a natural? I mean, it's what you're saying there is kind of natural, because I think we all find that situation where you kind of almost in a sense you don't do anything. You kind of look back and you watch the movie, but you don't do anything. And I was wondering, what is it? You use that word brainwashed. And I just think of the digital world that we live in. Marvin, I mean, you probably might be more familiar in the sense that you might be a lot more engaged with it in the work environment. But this digital world, when I find that I watch a video on YouTube and suddenly I get an SMS from a company trying to sell me something related to what I watched, and then I wonder, to what extent is my mind being conditioned by some algorithm out there? And maybe we are in exactly the same place. We think everything's fine, but we're not questioning it.
Yeah.
I like that concept of brainwash. I think everybody finds themselves in that place. I'm going to bring Peter back in just now, so I'm sure you might have some questions for him. But Marvin, just your response to that.
So I think in terms of the way things have gone into a digital sense, it was always going to be that way. If I look at the way our company had predicted the future as being a lot of things being digitized, a lot of things that we're predicting now is going to be automated and orchestrated and modular, and it's very much in line with what the way we want things to be. So if you think about if you were to consume something, sometimes you only want to have 10% of whatever it is you want to consume. You don't want to consume the full 100%. Why can't you do that? And in the past, you couldn't. In the days today, now you can. You can take that piece and that's all you want. And because what's happened is this digital era has allowed for companies to get closer to understanding what is it people really want. Before, they gave people everything that they thought they want and found that all that was used was maybe 10, 20% of that. So lots of resources were assigned, lots of costs were incurred, and the return didn't quite make sense. With the digital era that we're going into and that we're in at the moment already, it is all about getting a deeper understanding on that person that you're targeting, understanding their likes and their dislikes, and giving it to them at the price points, in the color, in the size, and that's how you'll see with all of the trackers and the cookies and whatever that you accept when you go into different websites. That's where you see all this targeted marketing come through, from your cell phone through to
somebody said something interesting. Marvin, I was watching a movie called The Social Dilemma, and
Yes.
what I found interesting, there was a comment made there that before this digital age, we actually had products that we developed and sold. Now suddenly the person has become the product.
Yes.
So they found out what we wanted, and then they began to tell us how, or sell that knowledge to others. And so we've actually become the product, perhaps, in this new age. Of course, the person who's become techno savvy in the time that I have known him is Peter himself. And I think he kind of embarrasses me every now and then with his ability with Facebook and other things that he's engaged in. So he's a great example of how you can learn new tricks as you journey in life. So I'm going to bring Peter back, because I'm sure there were so many notes that I made over here, but I'm sure there's some things that perhaps you guys might have that you'd like to ask Peter, and that he can share with us before we close this evening. So I'll let Heather start. Heather, if you've got something that you'd like to ask Peter.
Yeah, Peter spoke about humanity and that book that you have acquired. But talking from humanity and this whole digital era and taking the human out of it, because I don't know if you've had a phone and had to speak to some automated person who didn't understand you. How far can we go in addressing the human side of people in this digital era? How do we cope?
I think one of the things that is coming through from a management point of view is that management are trying to stifle initiative, and that they want just whackers, and to just do these things. Don't think about it. Just do it. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be creating that spark in the workplace, and it's not there. So much of it has been taken away from the workplace.
I was thinking today, Peter, about I think we talked some time ago about the idea of businesses with purpose. And today, after our chat this morning, I was just thinking how important it is for us to empower people to live with purpose. And maybe what you've been talking
really,
about this evening is a bit about that. It's about leaving.
That's part of the message. But sadly, that's not the case. And we look at the large organizations, and just somehow it's been taken out there. They've taken it's a case of the four witches of bureaucracy have taken over. You've got compliance, you've got so much red tape that people aren't able to make decisions, and they just process the paper. Benjamin Zander, who wrote The Art of Possibility, he's a bad leader, and he spoke about playing in the band. And if you don't see the people sparkling and enjoying it, it's not that's what's wrong with them, it's what's wrong with him as a leader. If we don't have leaders who are are inspiring people to step up and take control of them. And that's
I
really
think
with
there's
purpose.
also, isn't there also a little bit of a conundrum where, if you think of a pendulum, moving from one side to the next, prior to when this whole launchpad period, as Glenn calls it,
Love it.
started,
Love it.
we were very much in the faces of each other, and we all kind of got tired of that. Then this digital online meeting thing kicked in, and I don't know if you also experiencing it, but I'm kind of getting tired of doing things online. I prefer, and I actually emphasize with most of my clients, to meet face to face. Where we do meet face to face, I'm just amazed at how much more productive, how much more personal our discussions have become. How much more a question of that humanity side of things really comes out. When I reference the pendulum, I'm just saying, a couple of years ago, we were very extreme on one side. We went very extreme on the digital side. And I think at some point we're going to come back to the middle, where we find the balance between online and face-to-face. The balance between using technology and doing stuff as ourselves. The balance between the digital era and that humanitarian face-to-face type thing. And I don't know, I think my question then to Peter would be, is this something that you would have seen before? Is this something that you're seeing as well? And what's your perspective?
I've been amazed at technology. And then, as Glenn said a little earlier, I was a technophobe. I shunned it, but I've embraced it during this period. And I talk of two specific examples. I take my parochial little Santon Mug and Bean Map Cafe, and how we've gone from a group that met in the Mug and Bean at Santon City, and we've become a global group, certainly a national group. And I just think it's so wonderful what we've been able to achieve. I say that, but that was built on the back of the fact that we knew one another. We did have that physical relationship, but it was wonderful to see how we were able to grow it. Then I think one of the most exciting things that I went to was the Alpha Conference, where you had 45,000 people from around the world meeting digitally. And I just say, it wouldn't have been possible before. Now, I've been to a number of international conferences, and I found that this one digitally was almost as good as the ones that I've been to physically. So let's not knock it. There's great possibilities out. I mean, I'd love to see us have a conference like we've got today, where we've got 45,000 people listening to us.
Well, we just need to speak it, and it's going to happen. I can see incredible things taking place going forward, and certainly there's lots of value that one can draw from all forms.
I'm looking forward. I'm talking to Heather's group next month, and I just and I know that the others from South Africa have done that, and I just think it's wonderful that we were able to do that, and let's maximize the opportunity.
That's amazing, and I'm going to just state again, which I have in the last 2 weeks, that I'm part of my map is to go to Poland. I see the P could stand for Poland, and I'm going to be taking one of our trainers with us who's passionate about music. So we've got the music and we've got Poland. We just need to take the action now to make it happen. And I'm sure, as we've been sharing this evening, those of you who've been listening, and of course the four of us that are on the panel this evening, we may have had certain things triggered in our heart. And I trust that whatever that is that's been triggered, that you felt connected to, that you actually use one of the principles in Map for Life, and that is to write it down. Because when you write it down, things begin to happen. Just today, I got somebody sending me information about cheap flights to Poland because I mentioned it, and I've got the people in Poland are waiting for us. And I think together, there are many dreams that you might have. Speak it out, write it down, and begin to act on it. Because if you do, it certainly will come to pass. It's been wonderful having you tonight. Please remember, it's every Wednesday evening, same time, same place. There's absolutely no reason to have anything else booked on Wednesday from now going forward, because you know that Wednesday night is Map Night. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much to Peter for a wonderful message. Thank you to Heather and to Marvin for sharing tonight. Let's go out and have an incredibly exciting week ahead, where we begin to launch those dreams that we have. Good night, everyone.
And thank you to Ingwa.
Today, for me, today for you, today for each of us, is an opportunity and an invitation to step into a world of abundance, where your life matters, where your vision makes a difference, where the world will know that once upon a time in the past there was a man or a woman who rose to the calling of God in their life and made the impact that they were designed to make. And you have that ability. Just die to self, surrender to Him, and become significant. I couldn't be more excited for you. I could not be more excited about the future, because every person that you equip to take that step of putting a plan together for their life, a plan that is aligned with the desires of their heart, those people, those children, young and old, are going to come alive, and they're going to cause a ripple that goes through time that impacts the lives of others. Make the choice today to live a life of significance.